Thank you so much, Teri. So as Teri said, I'm going to take over the presentation here. So bear with me while I switch the screen sharing over to my screen. Oh, I think it's Teri. Can you confirm that you can see the screen share here?
Yes, I can.
And you see the Conservation Idaho Way tracker there?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to walk through a live demo of the Conservation Idaho Way web application, the Project Firma web application. I also have some of the other Project Firma instances available that we can take a look at. I have a number of features that I'm interested in sharing, and I know Damon had asked that we take questions at the end, but if folks do log a Q&A during the online demo, I can direct my demo to whatever is of interest. So folks who are attendees on this, please do feel free to log a question here, and if there's anything you see in the interface, I can incorporate that into the demo, or we can come back to it at the Q&A session at the end. So as Teri said, we have conservation.idaho.gov, a major coup for Teri and her agency to work with the governor and get that domain in place. This is the homepage for the project tracker, which just has really a storytelling device. And that in addition to providing workflows for Teri's staff and partners, there's also a public storytelling component to the tracker, and it's a major use of this. And so we want to have a visually compelling interface that members of the public can come to and feel free to explore. On the homepage, there's a content editor that Teri can control to update with the latest, greatest information. There's a project map showing all of the statewide projects that are being tracked going back to 1985, as Teri said. And then there's a place to view the featured projects, which are a small number of the many hundreds of projects in the state that are most compelling to the story that Teri wants to tell to the public users of the site. And this featured project list is something that Teri, as an administrator of the tool, has control over. So I'm going to hop over from what is here the production version of the site to what we call the QA or demonstration version of the site. And I'm going to do that so that any data changes I'll make as part of this demo would be temporary and not impact Teri's live production data. So when Sitka stands up an application, we always have two versions available, the production version and what we call the QA version for testing and demonstration purposes. So I have logged into the tool. There's a handy login, log out menu system here. Folks who log into the system would need to be assigned privileges by an administrator before they could manipulate any data. So not just anyone in the public could sign in and start changing things. But once Teri has assigned a role, a user could be able to enter new projects or update existing projects. So now that I'm logged in, I have access to some additional menus, a manage menu, and some other items that are controlled by my privileges in the tool. And I also have the ability to add and update projects. I'm going to start by hopping over to a particular project. You could find a project by clicking through on the project map or looking at the project menu. You can also search by name for a project. One that we wanted to highlight for the demonstration today was the North Central Idaho Wildfire Restoration Project. So here I am on a project detail page. This is the place where a user would go to see all of the nitty-gritty details of a project. There's also a fact sheet, which is kind of a high-level distillation of all of the information on the detailed sheet. So I'm going to come back to the detail page here and hop over to the fact sheet, which is more of the public-facing view. So a project fact sheet identifies the type of program. This is an assessment project, the assessment project. It identifies the lead implementer and all of the partner organizations who participate. And Teri's projects tend to have large numbers of partners, which is great to see and great to give credit to all of those partner organizations. So in this case, there's municipal partners at the governor's office and then a number of the conservation districts within the state who are participating as funders, and then there's other organizations who have a non-funder role who also get credit for this project. There's a primary contact who you might reach out to if you had any questions, and then the stage and the duration. So this is a project that was undertaken in 2015 and 16. You have the opportunity to add photos to start to tell the story of the project, a narrative description of the project, and then the key accomplishments, which are entered and can be updated on an annual basis by the project updaters. So this is a project that has conducted some road treatment and some training events. There's an opportunity to add map components showing the location of the project in the state, and then the ability to track the expenditures. This one has a lot of different funders, so the pie chart gets a little smaller than we'd like to see, but we're working to, when we initially built this, we hadn't anticipated quite such a diverse array of funders as Teri is able to bring to bear. So I think that's a great success story, and it's something on our roadmap to update this little pie chart to be a little larger when we have a large number of funders here. And I think this is a great story to tell, as Teri has been able to really reveal a need to scale to a greater number of partners than we'd initially anticipated. And so we're working with Teri and her team to accommodate that. Then later on in the fact sheet, we have the ability to show the before and after photos to tell the story of the success of this particular project. So the fact sheet has been a great storytelling element, as folks oftentimes have to scramble with your design staff if you're so fortunate to have one, or to pull it together as a program administrator if you're not large enough to have an in-house design staff, to pull fact sheets together to take to public meetings, to publish in a newsletter. Folks have been using these fact sheets to include in grant submittal applications. So these are really diverse devices for communicating project benefits, and they're designed to lay out on 2 pages so that you can fit them in, print them out, and fit them in to whatever tool you might need. And so we have this print to PDF that allows you to get the data out of the web application and into a PDF that's designed to fit on 2 pages and can be brought to various meetings and whatnot. So from the fact sheet, I'll go back to the detail page, which has a lot more information than the fact sheet has. And I need to make sure I found myself back on the production version of the site. So I'm going to make sure that I go back to the QA version of the site, because I'm going to log in and start making some data changes. So I'll just use the search functionality here to pull up that project detail page, making sure that I'm up here in the QA version of the site. As a logged in administrative user, I have access to edit buttons throughout the tool. These edit buttons are not present to users who don't have the right privileges. So any piece of information can be edited by a user with appropriate privileges through a user-friendly editor where you can come in and just make these changes. There's a data that can be entered around the project basic information. The project location has a nice editor that allows you to do things like come in here and pick and choose from an interactive map the congressional districts that might be associated with a particular project. So you could come in here and click and choose manually the appropriate conservation districts, or you can use the pinpoint location of the project to automatically select the appropriate congressional district, legislative district, watershed, etc. So there's a large spatial component to the storytelling around the projects that are being tracked. And then that information around the location is summarized here below the map. Similarly, editors to associate the partner organizations, the funders, the lead implementers, and the partners, as we saw on the fact sheet. Then there's an ability to add the accomplishments. For a project that has not yet been implemented, we would enter what do we expect to accomplish. And then later, when the project is underway or complete, we can report what actually occurred. So this is a nice functionality to both check what was built, what do you plan to build, and then what actually got built. And so that can be used as a measure of the successes and challenges that a project experienced as it went from concept to planning and design to implementation and completion. The expected performance measures are entered in aggregate, not per year, because you might just say, well, over the course of this project, we expect to treat 3 miles of roadway. When it comes time to actually report those accomplishments, that's reported on an annual basis. Teri prefers to report per fiscal year to align the accomplishments with her funding cycle. Other users of Project Firma might choose to use a calendar year or other basis to report their program accomplishments. And then scrolling down through the project detail page, we have opportunities to log the expected funding, which would be entered during the planning and design phases of a project. And then as those funds are actually spent, they would be logged as reported expenditures. One of the real values of this level of tracking is not just the project by project view that I'm showing here, but it's really the roll-up view that every project has the ability to report on. For example, try and pick a funding source that's going to be most interesting here might be, well, we'll go to a big one, the Forest Service. I can follow one of these links and get into the organizational page for the U.S. Forest Service and see their annual expenditures on all of the projects that they might be reported on. Another way to view the funding sources would be to go to the program info menu. So you can navigate in through the project, or you can come in from the top level angle and see a list of all of the available funding sources. For a particular, so this is the 118 funders now that Teri has logged into the system. And we often use these grid views to display a list of available data for a particular type of data. You can always get the data out of the system into Excel. All of these grids will have the opportunity to click and pull the data out. You know, we criticize, I wouldn't say criticize, but our partners are often, like Teri, frustrated with using Excel as a system of record. Excel is a pretty terrible system of record, but it's a pretty fantastic analysis tool. So we're not anti-Excel in any way. For a small program, Excel can work as a system of record, but when you need to start sharing data across partners and tracking changes over time, it quickly breaks down. So what we want to do is use Excel for what it's good for, which is creating ad hoc visualizations and analyses, but have an underlying data store that has versioning, that has permissions, and it can be used by many agencies without conflicting with each other. So that value, that kind of recognizing the proper use of the tool is reflected in wanting to empower users to get that data in Excel when it belongs, that's the right tool for the job. So I'm sorting this grid by the number of projects so that I can pull out a funder that has a kind of maybe a longer record of data. And here's the Idaho General Fund, who's been, it has a longer history of funding in Idaho, but as Teri said, we're still getting started logging data, but you can begin to envision what it might look like as you have years and years worth of data logged for a funding source within the state of Idaho. And then scroll down and see the actual projects with their annual expenditures and click in and look at those detail pages and fact sheets to understand the breadth of funding that's been applied. So the Idaho General Fund funding source is administered by an organization. So a funding source belongs to an organization. In this case, I'll click through to the Soil and Water Conservation Commission, Teri's organization, to take a look at the organizational level view of projects and funders. And here we can see that the ISWCC has close to a dozen or more funding sources that they're tracking, has projects throughout the state that this organization is tracking. So we can see the map view and then list views of all of the projects for which the ISWCC is the lead implementer, or a contributor for projects where they're not the lead implementer. These organizational views are really great when you have partners who you want that partner to be able to come into your tool and see how their contributions add up to the greater whole. So we can click in and see some charted expenditure views for ISWCC. You could also log in to your local, state, and federal partners and see their views in terms of the funding that the agency is providing. A lot of agencies are funders, and this view is a great view for those organizations who are providing funding. As we were working with the California RCDs, we realized that they have a different story to tell. Their success is not in the funding that they provide, it's in the funding that they obtain. And so we realized working with the California RCDs that we needed to provide both lenses to represent organizations who are providers of funds and organizations who are seeking funds. And so this lens allows us to see both perspectives. And that was kind of a nice revelation we had where in Tahoe, the story was really about providing the funds. But then as we work with smaller organizations, the story we wanted to tell is really about the ability to obtain funds. And then another tab available on the organization page is the accomplishments view, where we can go in and look at the suite of performance metrics that these are user defined by Teri or by the administrator of a tool to say, what are the accomplishments that we want to track per project and how do they roll up per organization? So here we can see the successes of the acres that are enrolled in an NRCS conservation cover crop performance measure and track those trends over time. So when we talk about turning data into actual actionable intelligence, this is the sort of thing that we're talking about, is rolling up the annual reporting per project into a program level view that can track over time how funding is resulting in actionable accomplishments. So I'm going to pause for just a second here and check in on time, because I can easily spend hours and hours walking through all the steps of the tool. And I just wanted to hear from Damon if I should keep going with the demo or pause for a moment.
Yeah, no, I think you can keep going, but we do have a question from one of the attendees. And thanks for giving me a moment to ask. One of the questions is like how much of this was customized specifically for Idaho, since it is an open source platform, or is this just kind of out of the box?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, and I really appreciate that one. Folks are able to use this out of the box through built-in configuration options, and there's a lot of configuration options that can be set. So it would be challenging to just hand this to a program and say, have at it, configure it. Because of the nuance in some of the configuration, we advise that there would be a role for Sitka to help walk through and train on what those configuration options are. But after an initial configuration engagement and consultation, you would be empowered to manage and change these things independently without Sitka's involvement. So I'll hop over really quick just to compare and contrast. Yes, Teri.
Can I just add too that I double dog dare you to take it out of the box and not want to customize it, because it's got so much potential that I found myself more often than not trying to rein myself in, asking Jeff, can we do this? Can we do that? It's really scalable and it's adaptable, and I think it's limited mostly by imagination.
Thank you, Teri. I love that. Limited by your imagination. So there are many configuration options that have been implemented as we've added users to the Project Firma community, that if a user comes in and says, I like the way this works, but I want it to be a little bit different, we don't change that for the existing users. We make it a configuration option that then becomes a flexible point, a decision that a new user of the community or an existing user would have to say, do I want to do it, go down road A or road B? So I'll hop over to the California RCD tracker, where the main thing you're going to notice that's been configured differently is the look and feel. So that's a configurable option, and here's another example with the Puget Sound Action Agenda Tracker, where we're able to incorporate the unique branding of an agency, the color palettes and logos, or we're able to design one with you to get the look and feel that you're interested in. Other configuration options are all of the labels can be changed. In the Puget Sound partnership, they don't talk about projects, they talk about their near-term actions. This is a near-term action tracker. So we've relabeled, and that's a configuration parameter that anybody could make to change the labels. If you don't use performance measures as your term for the accomplishments, you could label it as accomplishments or indicators. There's a number of terms that can mean the same thing that might apply to your agency. And then another important thing that could be configured is the list of performance measures. So here in the Puget Sound partnership, they have 8 performance measures defined, which is a very limited subset of things they're interested in tracking. If I hop back to the Idaho tracker, where we're using the term performance measures as opposed to progress measures, there's a very, very expansive list of operational activities that are being tracked, 228. And so these are kind of two extremes in the level of detail that you might want to track. And as an administrator, you can come in and delete performance measures, define new performance measures. Other elements that are configurable are how projects are classified. If there's a classification system for the types of projects that you're building. Within Idaho, we've defined a two-tier classification system, or as we call it, a taxonomy, where there's a high-level focus area, ag projects, conservation support projects, education and outreach projects. And within this top-level hierarchy, there's a sub-level of programs within these focus areas where projects can be classified. And then within a program, you have the actual projects that I could click through and see the fact sheets and the detail pages. So the terms in this hierarchy and the levels in this hierarchy are all customizable. So I would say if you're a smaller agency, a nonprofit or a watershed council, or maybe a regional agency, you could plug into this without requiring any new custom functionality. If you have specific requirements or you're a larger agency and you really want to tailor this to your needs, we can add entire new interfaces and workflows that will fit into this configurable model. And it really is kind of dependent on how well your needs align to the existing platform, what sort of funding you're interested in investing in the platform. We do have a community model. I talked at the beginning about the open source license and what that means, but I think I'll use this as an opportunity to expand on that, where the initial investment by Lake Tahoe in this platform was close to $1 million. It's an enormous investment for any agency to make. For the scale of the Tahoe's restoration programs at $1 billion+, I think they're at $2 billion now. That $1 million investment in tracking expenditures and accomplishments makes sense. $1 million investment would not make sense for the Soil and Water Conservation Commission. It would absolutely not make sense for the Clackamas Watershed Council. So those agencies are able to leverage the Tahoe investment and kind of plug in and fund some targeted feature enhancements. The benefit to Tahoe is because the features that Teri has funded are part of this open source community, they become available to Tahoe, they become available to Clackamas. And so there's really a very, very unique in government community funding model where a program that's smaller in scale than Tahoe can still come in and contribute and build the things that Teri needs. And when those things are of interest to the Clackamas Partnership or the Puget Sound Partnership or Tahoe, they become available back. And so there's this almost snowball effect as more people have joined, there's more shared investment and more shared benefit from that shared investment. And that is really completely optional for a user, whether they want to just plug in and use what's there or whether they want something new. And if they do want something new and are able to fund it and we're able to fit it into the roadmap, it becomes part of that community resource. Any other questions, Damon, or should I hop back to demo?
Yeah, you can go back to the demo.
Okay. So what I'd like to show now, I kind of walked through some of the views of the data, but I showed briefly how an administrator might use one of these editors to change project data. But this really is not, this platform is not around Teri coming in and entering all of the data. This platform, the core benefit is sourcing. I've used the term crowdsourcing, but I think Carl, you're on the call and you had advised me that crowdsourcing was maybe the wrong term to use, and that we're not asking Joe Public to come in and log every project that they're doing. But what we are asking is that the partner agencies, the lead implementers, would have privileges, kind of a curated list of users who would come in and be able to enter their projects. And Teri and her designees would have the ability to review that data entry, make sure it's of sufficient quality, and approve it. So it's sort of maybe not crowdsourced, but maybe we could call it agency sourced, where you're looking to go to the implementers, your partner agencies, and have them be the ones who would enter their data. So What Teri might do is send an invite to one of her partner agencies at a conservation district or at a federal agency she works with, and invite them through the tool to create an account and assign that privileges to administer projects that that agency is the lead implementer of. And then that agency user would be able to come in here and click Add Project. And the first thing they're going to have to do is determine whether this is a proposal for future work or whether it's back entering of historic data. And this decision is important because we collect different types of data for proposals for future projects versus when you're back entering a historic project. The notion is over time, there should be very few existing projects that are entered, that eventually you'll have all of your existing projects in, and that we would then be kind of in a curation mode where we're adding new projects. But as the tool is newly launched, you might be back entering a suite of projects over time. But let's go ahead and we'll make a proposal for a future project here. So we are designing this workflow for folks who are sort of casual users of the tool. They may be getting in a couple of times a year. Teri could be in here every day curating and administering her projects, but we want to make, and so we're comfortable giving Teri what we call an administrative editor that has a little bit less instructions and really kind of requires you to know what you're doing. But when you're inviting one of your agency partners to come in and enter data, they might see this as, oh no, another data entry exercise. How do I do this? Do I want to do this? And so we really want to make this easy, and we've invested in making this easy for those types of users by providing a step-by-step workflow and providing what we hope to be some user-friendly instructions. I'll draw attention here. You might see a little flash on the screen. As an administrative user, I see this edit button. When one of your agency partners came in, they would not see this, but this is a means where Teri could come in and change the content to update the instructions if she needed to change the language. So this is something that an administrator can customize for their instance of a tracker, but a user who's here to actually propose a project wouldn't see this. So I might begin my data entry, and then I would be walked through step by step to kind of choose what type of project I'm entering. And this just walks you through step by step, entering the type of data that's needed for this tracker to provide the roll-up reporting and the detailed project fact sheets that we're looking to demonstrate. And what we learned in Tahoe is that the fact sheet is kind of a carrot for folks to want to get good data in here, because folks, you may have a stick, a regulatory authority to require folks to report data. But oftentimes folks who are using this tracker are not in a regulatory role. They don't have a mandate for their reporters to enter data. It can oftentimes be voluntary. And so we want to make it easy, and we want to provide benefits to the folks who are entering data. Choosing the location of the project, zooming in and finding, okay, roughly in this area, drop a little pin on the map. Once you've dropped your pin on the map to show the location, we can move forward and enter the partners. In this case, my organization, Sitka Technology Group, defaulted as the lead implementer, but this is the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation who's doing this one for our example. And choosing the lead implementer, Damon, hey, you can be our lead implementer on this. And then if there's any conservation districts, we've configured this tracker so that the conservation districts are a special type of organizational partner. You don't have to do that if you're not a conservation district and aren't working with conservation districts. This is another configuration parameter. It doesn't require custom coding. You can just define the types of organizations. These are all configurable, but we might add a couple of conservation districts who are partnering, and then a couple of other partners. The elks and the caribous are coming together on this one, in this example. After we've entered all of the organizational partners for this proposal, we can then associate other spatial data. You can click on the map to choose your congressional district, or you can just use the point location to say, hey, this point is within this congressional district. So Teri was really kind of spearheading think actually the California RCDs initiated this tracking by legislative and congressional district. And then Teri came in and funded making it easier to enter the data. Kind of Teri's investment, one of her investments in the community was saying, hey, it's kind of lame, John, that I have to come in here before we implemented this button. Teri had to come in and click the right one. And she asked, doesn't the point feature tell you the right one? We're like, oh, you're right, Teri, it does. Let's make this easier for the data entry by providing this set from location button. And this feature is one that has now flowed to all of the other Project Firma users, a really great example of the community funding model where Teri had an idea and now it's benefiting folks throughout the Western United States. That's a pretty cool story to be able to tell. So previously, before we had this set from simple location button, it was a little bit frustrating for certain users to come in here and have to find the right one on the map and click the button. And now you can kind of rip right through this. Thanks, Teri. The Watersheds similarly. So now this project knows, so that you might ask why if the tool can choose these watersheds automatically, why even make a user come in and look at it? And the reason for that is oftentimes, well, we've mapped the location at this point, but it actually is crossing into the 3 neighboring watersheds, and we want these watersheds to be associated with the project as well. So that would be why we would ask a user to come in and review this information rather than just assigning it automatically and not asking anyone to look at it. So this project now has 3 watersheds associated. And then because we're at the proposal stage rather than back entering a project, we're not actually tracking reported accomplishments. This is a proposal. It hasn't done anything yet. But we might come in and say we're gonna come in and report on.
John?
Yes, Damon.
I think I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Teri, can you hear me? Teri's nodding. Teri's on mute. I don't know if any of the other attendees, if you're able to hear me.
You might turn up your mic, John. It's a low voice, but I can hear you.
Okay, Damon, can you hear me? Damon, can you hear Teri?
Damon, can you hear me?
Okay, so we've got some other commenters coming in. Meg and Ellen, thank you for noting that you can hear us fine. So Damon, the problem appears to be on your end. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed.
Yep.
So a user would enter the expected accomplishments for this proposal for a future project. And then similarly, I tried to move forward without having saved the page. And so the tool here informed me that I forgot to click the save button and it didn't want me to lose my data. So remember to click the save button and move forward. And then on to the expected funding. So similarly to the expected accomplishments, we might have identified some funders who are have been identified and are interested in supporting this project. And we might say, this program, we've secured some funding. We know some landowners are interested in funding this, but we haven't secured it yet. So we're going to enter that as unsecured funding that would need to be advanced into secured funding before we could move forward. And we could save and continue. And then lastly, there's an opportunity to add some, classify the projects according to the themes that Teri has defined. And then an opportunity to add some photos and attach any documents you might want to attach to the project. You can imagine how these editors might work. And then once all of the required data has been entered, you'll see these green check boxes, which is the sign that this project is ready to submit. Certain pieces of data entry are mandatory, that we don't have a sufficient project record until all these green check boxes are complete. Other pieces of data are not mandatory and you could move forward without them. But once all of the mandatory data is entered, a user would be able to click the submit button. And what this does is this triggers an email that goes from the tool to the designated administrators or project stewards. It says, hey, a user has proposed a project. Please come in and review it. Teri would click that email in her inbox, or she could come to the tool here. And as an administrator or a project steward, Teri would have the ability to review the proposal, check that the information was entered to her satisfaction, and either return it back for more data entry, which would trigger an email to the person who'd originally entered the proposal and say, hey, we didn't have everything we needed. Can you come back and enter some more data? Or to approve it, at which point it becomes part of the record in the tool and available to others to see. When the proposal is provisional, only the person who entered it and Teri and her other administrators could see it. But once it's approved, it's now part of the official record and starts to show up in the roll-up reports and via the fact sheet.
Okay.
Can you hear me again,
well,
Damon?